The moment we heard news of Suzanne Collins releasing a prequel book on her Hunger Games series, fans immediately began to speculate what will it be about. Collins did not give out a synopsis or even a book title, but she gave us a list of topics she wants to explore in the prequel, along with a book release date of May 19, 2020. So for this video, we will separate rumors from the facts that came out the moment the announcement was made, and then dissect every little thing that has been revealed so far about this prequel and what can we speculate from them. However, here's a disclaimer or fair warning. These are just my own views and ideas. I'm also very cognizant and wary of forming speculations a year before a book comes out, because fan ideas can be dangerous and usually the big reason why people get disappointed when the actual book, movie, show comes out, because they turn out to be nothing like what fans have speculated and hyped up in our heads. So I'm going to stick as closely as we can to actual news reports and verified source materials and base my speculations and theories off that, rather than going off rumors and unsupported fandoms. Suzanne Collins said in her statement on June 17, 2019, that with this book, I want to explore the state of nature, who we are, what we perceive is required for our survival. The Reconstruction period 10 years after the war, commonly referred to as the Dark Days, as the country of Panem struggled back to its feet, provide fertile grounds for characters to grapple with these questions and thereby define their views of humanity. This is now where we try to separate the facts from assumptions, because what I've just read is the only verified information we got so far regarding the prequel, nothing more. But from this, many have immediately speculated that it will be about the 10th or 11th Hunger Games, that the main character will be Mags. In both book and movie, Mags is the old lady in Catching Fire who volunteered in place of Annie to be the female victor tribute for the third quarter quell. I've seen a couple of reactors who also says that the prequel will begin the morning of the reaping of the 10th Hunger Games. I tried to look for the source for this, but all news reports on the prequel announcement, including by Scholastic, are going off the same AP News War report, and I cannot even find Suzanne Collins' actual press release. Hunger Games Net on Twitter, however, posted a screenshot from a publisher's lunch industry newsletter that it states it will be revisiting the world of Panem 64 years before the events of the Hunger Games, on the morning of the reaping of the 10th Hunger Games. But none of the articles reported on this, including the one directly tweeted by Scholastic. And there's no secondary source to verify this information as of recording this video. While opening the prequel book with the morning of the reaping is a nice callback to the beginning of the Hunger Games book, I'm holding off running with this information until it is fact-checked. I've also just seen Screen Rant release an article on everything we know about the 10th Hunger Games. Again, we don't know if the prequel is going to be about the 10th Hunger Games or if it will even be the main focus of it, even if it checks out that it starts with the reaping of the 10th Hunger Games. Given the themes Collins said she's going to explore, the prequel is currently referred to as Untitled Panem Novel, not Untitled Hunger Games Novel. It seems to me that she wants to tell the story of Panem and not just the games, though I'm sure the games will still heavily exist in the prequel, but based on Collins' statement, it is likely more about how the people of Panem who are trying to survive and rebuild a decade after the Dark Days, rather than it be solely about a past victor's Hunger Games. Of course, for the characters in the prequel, the Hunger Games is still very new to them, and it will be interesting to see what the early years of Hunger Games is like, before people actually volunteer to be in the games, before there are career districts, before there are mentors, escorts, stylists, and even game makers. What the reaping ceremonies were like, if tesserae for the districts exist already. How the Hunger Games was perceived by the people, both by the capital and the districts, before it became reality TV, something that is celebrated as a national event or holiday, before it was a distraction to entertain capitalites, before it became the embodiment of Panem at circuses. It will be interesting to see all of that unfold, but I don't think the 10th Hunger Games will be the focus like the 74th and the 75th Hunger Games were in the books. If so, it's unnecessary because we don't need to be introduced to the general concept of Hunger Games. We already know how it works. The prequel will also be then just a repeat of the first Hunger Games book instead of a companion that enriches and expands from the original trilogy. But to go back to the Screen Rant article, it listed a couple of names, and I quote, Griffin A. Smith was a District 2 resident and the victor of the 10th Hunger Games. Griffin won his Hunger Games through an especially prominent show of violence, as his preferred weapons were an axe and a machete. He earned the nickname the Bees during his time in the arena, with one of his most memorable kills involving shooting a girl in the eye with an arrow and pulling it out while she was still alive, proceeding to stab her repeatedly. Griffin went on to become a mentor to a future District 2 trivids and was customary for victors of the Hunger Games. He ultimately died in his late 50s of natural causes sometime after the 66 Hunger Games, end quote. While admittedly it's been a while since I read a book, I did quick search in my Kindle books and no Griffin popped up. The closest victor referred to as the Bees is Titus from District 6, who was the reason cannibalism was banned from the Hunger Games. But Titus was someone Katniss remembered in the games before her own game, so he was not even from the early days of Panem. Screen Rant also mentions a game maker named Lucas Castor as a game maker who was alive back then. Again, I don't remember him from the books and he did not come up in my Kindle research. It seems that Screen Rant article likely based all this information from the Mockingjay Part 1 movie, where there's a set design of the names of victors listed in pillars at the Tribute Center, and the Hunger Games wiki and fans just did the math on figuring out who is the victor from what year. While Suzanne Collins was heavily consulted for the movies, especially for Mockingjay, I don't take anything from the movies and its related promotional materials that is not in the books or deviated from books as canon. Those victor pillars were also very inconsistent with the books as well, as we saw from those pillars that is missing the names of the first victor from District 12 and it only lists Haymitch, Katniss, and Peeta as victor. As mentioned earlier, there's also immediate speculation that Mags is going to be the lead, as she supposedly is the winner of the 10th or 11th Hunger Games. But again, information on Mags that people are going off on are based on movie conceptions and mostly on fanon, not what was actually in the books. While we know it's possible Mags was already alive during the setting of the prequel or even during the Dark Days, we don't have an idea of how old she was when she first entered the games, or even how old she actually was during the third quarter cal. And for me personally, I would have loved the prequel to be following the rise of President Snow in the Capitol and while seeing the rise of President Coin in District 13 after the Dark Days, but it also seems that they're still too young for the time period the prequel is going to be set on. At most, we might get an Easter egg of appearances by them, or the new characters might be related to them. From District 12, it is possible we will find out who their very first victor was, since we have no information of who he or she or they was from either books or the movies. It is speculated that the person won very early on, since Haymitch, the winner of the 50th Hunger Games or the second Carter Cal, fails to mention having a mentor or knowing the victor before him. Maybe we'll also see a young Greasy Say, and I think that will be poetic if she was someone who was born during the Dark Days, grew up in the beginnings of Panem, and also lived long enough to see the Hunger Games end. We know Greasy Say is old, but we don't know how old. She might just look older than she actually is, or she lived long enough to reach her late 70s and early 80s. But as much as I would love to see characters we already know, I also would like to see the new characters anchor the prequel. Of course, it is hard to say if Suzanne Collins can come up with a character better than or even just as good as Katniss Everdeen, or if she should even try, because the comparisons will definitely be inevitable. That's why in my initial reaction video, I said that I want the prequel to be multi-POV, so it's not just one lead character that we hear from. I think it's reasonable to expect or want the prequel to be presented from multiple perspectives, since the publisher from Scholastic, who I'm sure has read a draft or the first few chapters of the prequel already, said that Collins is giving us a new perspective in this modern classic. So I take that to mean that it will be written differently from the original Hunger Games, and that it can easily include multiple perspectives. When I first heard the news about a prequel, my initial understanding was it was going to be about the Dark Days before there was Hunger Games, and my excitement got dampened a little bit when I realized that it was actually going to be 10 years after the Dark Days, not that 10 years after North America became Panem, which was during the Dark Days. I thought that would have been a great place to do a prequel, to see how Panem became Panem, and why and how the first rebellion failed, and how did the founding fathers, or game makers, come up with the Hunger Games. It is also a good mirror to the original trilogy, since that started with the games and ended with a war, while the prequel would have started with the rebellion and ended with the games. So I'm a bit disappointed that it's not the main concept for the prequel, but then it can still be. I've seen comparisons made with Hulu's Handmaid's Tale, where we follow June, who already had a kid and husband before America became Gilead, and became a handmaiden during the early days of Gilead. In this Hulu adaptation, we don't only see what's going on with Gilead at their present, but we also get flashbacks to how America became Gilead. So I'm hoping it will be similar with this prequel. While the book is set 10 years in after the Dark Days, we will get flashbacks to what actually happened and the failed rebellion that led to the Hunger Games. So now we have debunked rumors and separated facts from assumptions. Let's dissect what Suzanne Collins said about the prequel. First part of her statement says that she wants to explore the state of nature and who we are. So does she mean the physical environment or human nature or both? According to the first Hunger Games book, Panem came to be as a consequence of climate change. The continued onslaught of different natural disasters led to the depletion of natural resources and land, which then led to war. While the Reconstruction period was going on, an uprising began against the capital. The books also mentioned that almost no one was left from killing each other during that failed rebellion, which became the rationalization behind coming up with the Hunger Games. So during this time, Panem was lacking every kind of resource, from natural resources to human resources, and they are deep into nation building and post-war reconstruction. It was the end of civilization and in every way a post-apocalyptic world, but unlike during Katniss's time, people are likely still reeling and has not accepted their new normal, and perhaps most aren't accepting or indifferent to their new reality yet, since whoever survived the Dark Days knew a world before the games, and maybe even when North America still existed and is not yet Panem. Collins might depict a divided Panem, not just because districts are purposely isolated each other by the capital, but as she said in the next part of her statement, that the new characters will grapple to define their views of humanity as they debate what they perceive as required for their own survival. So it seems like Collins is taking inspiration from the political and social debates we are having today, defining what our values are and fighting for the world we want to live in, as opposed to the direction our elected leaders want to take us to. But what was that like for the people of Panem when in some ways it seems too late to do anything? They tried rebelling, they lost the war, they lack resources. Every week is infrastructure week by the government, but nothing gets done. And to top it off, their children are being sent to fight to the death. People need food, jobs, medicine, and shelters, but also they don't trust the people in charge. Those in charge feel they can't do anything without securing law and order first, and to stop any notions of rebellion to prevent destroying whatever they have left, hence coming up with the Hunger Games. While these themes were somewhat already present in the original Hunger Games, especially through the different philosophies espoused by Katniss, Peeta, and Gale on survival and humanity, it will be interesting to see a new and updated take from Collins on those topics, especially in relation to our current political and social climate, and since we are more engaged now politically than when the first books came out. While it will be hard for her to top Katniss as a character, it will also be exciting to see new characters with different personalities and belief systems from the original characters, and to see them grapple with what they believe they need to do in order to survive, or if survival remains to be their main goal, especially if survival comes at the expense of losing their humanity, or if there's still a way for them to survive and not lose their humanity in Panem during the early years of the Hunger Games. Obviously, I'm excited about the prequel, but at the same time, there are concerns. Like, 1, if it will be good and not be a disappointment, and B, will it enhance the world of the Hunger Games or will it tarnish the legacy of the original trilogy? Not because I don't have faith in Suzanne Collins to pull it off, but we have seen this happen to beloved books that gets a prequel or sequel years later and people hate it. Case in point, like To Kill a Mockingbird when Ghost Said a Watchman was released, or with Harry Potter and Star Wars with the divided reception to their prequels and sequels. Additionally, we have a year until the book comes out to speculate and build this up in our heads. Popular fans will emerge as we get more and more details about the prequel. But once the prequel comes out and it turns out to be different from what fans wanted it to be, it's almost predictable that it will be labeled as bad writing, even if the reason is not because it was written badly, but because things did not go the way the fans wanted or hoped it will be. But then, something could also be revealed in the prequel that will change how we see the original books, even though the prequel is set 64 years before. More importantly, while The Hunger Games was certainly provocative and forward-thinking when first released in 2008, if the prequel released in 2020 is written exactly the same, the prequel will feel very outdated and will be heavily criticized that for a futuristic novel, it is very behind the times. The last concern I have about the prequel is the overall tone. Hunger Games was by no means a cheery book. It was pretty brutal and dark for a YA novel. But the trilogy was always about hope, despite everything around us tells us it's futile to have hope, and to not be indifferent and not to give in to despair. Whatever the prequel is going to be about, we ultimately know what's going to happen in the end, and it's not a good ending. They will still have Hunger Games for years to come. The capital will only go stronger, especially once Snow comes into power. So how does this prequel maintain its message of hope? How can Collins make it more about the journey and not the destination? Does it only intend to be a cautionary tale? But even cautionary tales need light and glimmer of hopes. The entire prequel cannot just be tragedy porn. We've also seen the prequel announcement to have a single feather as a graphic. It is definitely a nod to the mockingjay, but why feather? Birds, unlike plants, don't propagate from a single feather. Why not an arrow or bread, since panem is a Latin word for bread? Is the feather just a symbol for Collins writing again? Is it because we will get to see how jabberjays were used by the rebels against the capital? Will we see the first spotting of a mockingjay? How heavy will the symbolism of a feather and foreshadowings will be in relation to the original trilogy? If nothing else, what I hope I get out of the prequel is an accurate map of Panem and the district formations.